Okay, so last week we started Chof Ches Amud Aleph, the new Mishnah, and we got into it a little bit. So just for a quick review, the Mishnah here asks the question: after all the after finding the garment or finding the Aveda, the question becomes how long do you have to hold it? What's the obligation of the Shabbos Aveda? Machlokes between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. Tanna Kama says, we said Kadesh Yirbo Shchenov, and we said that means essentially those who are in the neighborhood of where the object was found. They have to know about it. Once they know about it, that's already sufficient. And if there's no response, then you don't have to hold it anymore. Mitzvah is over. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shalosh Regalim va'acha haregel.
Testing.
Sure, 1 week. In other words, Shalosh Regalim in a week. So that was the Mishnah, and the first part of the Gemara that we discussed here went back and forth with a kasha. We see that from another Gemara that the Geshamim occurred either 3 days in Mar Cheshvan or 7 days in Mar Cheshvan, and if you go by the latter, 7 days in Mar Cheshvan, that's because it took 15 days to get to Nahar Paras. So how could you say that the whole point of Rabbi Yehuda's point of Shalosh Regalim is people would get back to their homes, and it would take 3 days, and then 3 days to come back, and 1 day to claim. That's why you had that extra week. But if you have, so that's a week. So how can that Gemara say that it can take as much as 8 days or 15 days, 8 days, and then the 7 days on top of it? So that was a kasha. So the Gemara answered by saying that there was a difference between the first and second base Hamikdash, and went back and forth, which was the more severe situation, the first base Hamikdash where there were more people, or the second base Hamikdash where there were less people, so there was less time. In any event, that's how the Gemara wanted to answer it, that there was a chilik between the two Batei Mikdash. So now we're holding about 7 lines from the bottom, where Rava comes, and Rava wants to say, Rava Malosh Naba Mikdash Rishon Malosh Naba Mikdash Sheni. Let's not get into Mikdash Rishon, Mikdash Sheni, more people, less people, and therefore it took either more or less time to get to the outskirts or to the very end of the borders of Eretz Yisrael. He doesn't want to go there. He says it makes a very simple statement. This is a practical answer. We're very appreciative when someone finds an Aveda and he wants to return it. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. We're not going to tax him. We're not going to make it difficult on him. We're not going to say just because you found it and have to do the mitzvah, now you're going to have to jump through hoops to fulfill the mitzvah. Says Rava, no, 7 days, that's it. That's enough. If someone can't get their act together or there isn't someone who steps up, so to speak, in 7 days, then the finder has met his burden of a Shabbos Aveda, and we're not going to tax him. So that's how Rava cuts through the whole thing. And he says, no, that we're not going to Yosem Medai. Okay, so that's Rava Shita. So he doesn't accept Rav Yosef and all these other the position of going back and forth depending on Mikdash. Now, Amar Ravina. So Ravina is now going to introduce something which becomes very important for us now and on Chafkes days. Amar Ravina. Says Ravina, Shema Mina. We learn from this Gemara, we learn Ki Machris, Galima Machris. Okay, there is a discussion in the Gemara which will be amplified on Daf Chafkes days between Yehuda and Rav Nachman. But there's a Gemara there that says, when you announce, I think we touched on this last week, when you make an announcement, what do you announce? Do you say, I found an Aveda, and now people out there have to sort of figure out what Aveda is he talking about? Is he talking about a shirt? Is he talking about a diamond? Is he talking about any other item? Aveda means a lost object. It doesn't say, it's not a noun. So do we say that that's what he says, or do we say that you have to announce the object and let the owner come back with the siman for the object? So we're using galima, a piece of clothing, as an example. So using that example, you have to announce, I found a shirt. Now, the obligation is going to be on the owner to say, yeah, I lost a shirt and it was checkered and it had stitches and it had this, that, and the other. Why, says the Gemara? If you have a Havamina, that he can get away with saying, I found an Aveda, and now everybody has to sort of scurry around and figure out what's he talking about. Then you need to give him at least another day for him to rummage around all of his items and figure out what he lost. In other words, if you're going to say something as generic as Aveda, then it's not fair, because a person lost something, he's going to have to go back, not just go back. If you said glima, an item of clothing, and he went back and he looked through his clothing rack and he said, oh, wait a minute, I'm missing a shirt, yes. And so I'm going to come back and claim that shirt or whatever the item is. Okay. But if you're going to say Aveda is generic. He needs an extra day just to go through everything he owns to figure out if he lost something. Says the Gemara, it's a raya from here that it has to be glima, because since you're only giving him 7 days, and the 7 days are 3 plus 1, right? 3 going, 3 coming, and 1 to claim. Where's the extra day? You don't have another day. And if you say Aveda, you need an extra day. That's the Gemara's kasha. So it should be a proof from here that what you're obligated to say is the actual item, and then let someone give a siman to the item. That's what the Gemara is coming to tell us here. So Ravina says, Shema minot, machris glima machris. The isol kedata chavidita machris, bidin lemitzvah lechad yuma liyanuya b'mayna. That he just to go through everything he owns. Elo shema mina glima machris shema mina. So now the Gemara here wants to conclude that that's the correct interpretation. When it says shema mina and then shema mina a second time, that's kind of like the stamp of approval. This is it. So that's what he's saying, that it is glima. Let's take a look at Rashi. Shema mina, midlo yovle rabbanan shahus. Since the rabbis didn't give him extra time, ela halicha v'chazara, just going and coming, so he didn't give him that extra day. Therefore, galima machris, zeh shemotza machris shem chayfetz talis matzasi. I found a talis or a garment, whatever. L'kach lo hitztuf elitin shahus yom echad la'ayin bekelav ma ovid. He doesn't have to go through his entire inventory of everything he owns. What did I possibly lose? Because if the guy said, I found something, and it's generic, then everybody's going to say, what did I lose? Because the person knows how many talesim he has. So if you say a garment, he knows what he owns. So he goes in, opens up his closet. It's not one of those guys that has 7 closets of shoes and suits and shirts and everything else. He has a reasonable number. He checks that number and he says, oh yes, I'm missing my very fancy suit, my sharkskin suit that I bought back in the day when it was iridescent, and that was it, and that's my go-to suit, and I'm missing it. Okay, so then he knows it. He goes back and he says, yes, it was gray, iridescent, etc. But so therefore, that's what the Gemara says. Therefore, since he wasn't given that extra day, it has to be that it was more specific. I lost an item. Maybe I lost a pearl. Maybe I lost a diamond. I mean, whatever it is. And then you have to go ahead and give the simon. The isol kedata chavidata machriz, because if you have a havamina, that he can announce a vidita, I just lost an item, he needs another day just to investigate everything. And this is a plukta later, as I said, it's going to be a machlokes between the Yehuda of Nachman. We'll get into that on the podcast on the base, but it's a machlokes as to whether or not you announce a vidita or glima. Okay, so now, all right, so that's where we are. So we just gave from this Gemara, we conclude that it has to be Glima. That's what Ravina says. Comes Rava, the same Rava who just said that that we are not matriach, that the whole point of Shabbos Aveda is to allow for someone reasonably to return an item, but not to burden him. Even you can even say avidita machlis, that you don't announce the item, you announce generic. And Rav is the shitaso. And Rav says the same thing he said just up above, that even though you say avidita, we still don't overburden the finder to more than 7 days. So in other words, 7 days is what Chazal said is what you get, 1 week. Doesn't matter, according to Rava, even if it's avidita, and he has more research to do, not just going into his clothes closet. He's got to go to everything he owns. Nevertheless, says Rava, that's acceptable because and that's Rava Shita. Rava Shita is you get 7 days, no more. And therefore, according to him, you can't prove that it's Galima. It could even be Avidita. Okay? Says Rashi, you don't wait more than 7 days. 7 days is enough time for someone to figure it out. And if he doesn't, then chaval.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
What's the big deal? Let it just run one more day. I mean, why not?
You know what? That's an interesting point, one more day, because we're basically saying that if you find it, we're not being matriach. There's a halacha that says Shabbos Aveda, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's 3 regalim in a week, and we're not gonna extend that week beyond, because Jay, if you say 1 day, then you can say, oh, wait a minute, he needs another day or another day. So
slippery slope.
Slippery slope. That's exactly right.
If
you make a statement and we say it's 7 days, then that's Rabbi Yehuda Shita. It's 7 days. Why go to 8? Just because Avidita or Glima. In other words, that shouldn't be a factor. That's what the Gemara is telling us. That we establish it, says Rava, and we stick with it.
It just seems like
it's not that the day is a big deal, Jack. It's a big deal.
How did they get the 7 days? It wasn't a precise number.
I mean, that was Rabbi Yehuda Shita. Rabbi Yehuda said that you give him 1 week, but he articulated 3 days, and then 1 day. 3 days to go, 3 days to come, 1 day to announce. How he came to that, I can't tell you. That must have been, I mean, again, they figured out that that's really all you need. That's really all you need. And as it is, you're getting 3 regalim. You're getting 3 cracks at it. So after and now we're going to talk about those 3 cracks in a minute here. But if you get 3 cracks at it and then another 7 days, it's kind of like enough is enough. And you're right, 1 day shouldn't make a difference, but it's really more. That's what Chazal is establishing. That's what we go by, and we don't do anything.
They really didn't leave margin for difficulties, unforeseen weather, or a breakdown in the wagon or whatever. I mean, they just made it so black and white when in fact.
Right. Didn't account for any traffic jams. But then again, I mean, the biggest issue they probably figured was weather, and we're talking about a non-weather event, because we're talking about, remember, we're talking about before the rainy season. So they didn't account for traffic jams based on Migdash, Rishon, Shani, too many people, too little people. This is what they said. They made a precise statement, but remember, it's not the 7 days. It's kind of like the 7 days is for the real laggards, because you got 3 regalim, you had a whole year. And again, in this principle, people are coming up to Oila Regel regularly. So and they go to the place where everybody announces, which we'll see in the Gemara, tells us about that as well. So I mean, how many cracks can you get? You get 3 regalim. That should be enough.
Well, so
after that, we'll give you 7 more days.
So a couple of I mean, the regalim was a big deal.
Right.
So the idea is that, all right, so you miss one, you're sick, and you miss another one because family stuff, and finally by the 3rd one you'll get, so it was definitely a big deal to get there.
The figuring is that between the 3 regalim you'll get 1, right?
Right. A week afterwards also fits. I don't know halakhically how it fits, but I know, for example, if I remember correctly, the whole issue that of Shavuos, of whether we say Tachanun for a week or not the week
Right.
after, because the idea that each regel would extend a whole week. So Pesach
Right.
and Sukkot were themselves a week, and Shavuos would be extended a week for the people who Ola regel. So it fits with that as well.
Right.
And then the other thing is, on the one hand, yeah, okay, maybe we're making it tough on the people that they have this only this short time around each regal, because really they have to get to Yerushalayim to even know. They didn't send out Twitter or an email from Yerushalayim to let everybody know what was found. So, but it's a tircha also for the person who found the object, for him to have to stick around in Yerushalayim for more than a week after the regel. Just because to hold on to this shirt doesn't seem fair, so there has to be an end. And they can't have. And what are you going to have somebody in Yerushalayim, a warehouse that's just going to keep filling and filling and filling with everything that everybody loves?
And that's Rabba's view. And that's Rabba's view that we have to balance the mitzvah between the Hashavas Haveda and the tircha to the person, not to overburden him, because once you overburden, people are going to say, I don't want to be stuck. I'm not going to pick this up because I don't want to be stuck.
Well, do they ever come across the notion that by the time you have 3 shalosh regalim, the owner should have found out that he lost something?
That's exactly the point.
I
I
mean,
think that's the point.
That's the point.
he
That's the
doesn't
point.
go through his, it's like almost a year. He doesn't know he's missing something. Obviously, he doesn't need it, or he forgot about it. So
Jay, it's totally.
I'm viewing it from the one who might have lost something. He should have uncovered that he lost something.
Right. It's a balancing act.
Not put the burden on the one who found it, is what
Correct.
So it's interesting, Rabbi, if I could just jump in. So actually, these 7 days, these are really going above and beyond. In other words, you might say, look, Shalosh Regalim, you've given him a full year to find it. But in addition to that full year, we're still going to add on the 7 days on the off chance that it was only the last of the Shalosh Regalim that he actually hears about it, so he can run home and come back. So if anything, I think those extra 7 days kind of is an added, it's an added benefit. In other words, you might say Shalosh Regalim and that's it, but we say it's a Shalosh Regalim plus, you got to give 7 days on top. So instead of saying why is it only 7 days, the other way you could say is, maybe you don't even need the 7 days. Like Jay said, a full year, if you don't realize you lost it, you just don't miss it.
Right. So people are Ola regel for every regel. So let's say he came to Sukkot and he realized he lost it. He could have nipped it right there and he could have announced, I have it. Okay, for Fallon. Then we come to Pesach, Sukkot Shavuos, or whichever regel is second. And again, he didn't do it. Now he's down to his 3rd crack of the apple. Like you say, we've given him 3 cracks of the apple. He, by now, like you say, Jay, he should know if he lost something. It shouldn't be like last minute, everything last minute. And on top of that, we're going to give him 7 days because of
an extra 7 days. Yeah.
So the 7 days is mamish l'fnim adin. That's already the very last resort.
So I'd like to withdraw my question.
Yeah. All right. Look, again, you can always look at it from different perspectives, but I think the Chazal was trying to balance that it's fair to the person who lost it, but it's also got to be fair to the finder, and that's really what we're talking about. Okay, so now we have a machlekes in the Gemara between Ravina and Rava whether or not you announce glima or avidita, because according to Rava, you can even announce avidita and you still don't go more than the 7 days because you're not matria. Now, 2 lines from the bottom. Now we're going to get into the question we've just been addressing, sort of. Tana Rabbanan. What does the person say who found the object? Okay, the finder. Tana Rabbanan. Regel Rishon Omer, Regel Rishon. In other words, there is this place, I call it the speaker's corner because I always compare it to Hyde Park. But there's this place, and the Gemara is going to tell us about this place in a minute, where everybody convenes for lost and found. It's the lost and found department, Jay. I think you were alluding to that. So the guy gets up and he says, Regel Rishon, I'm now announcing the first regel. In other words, remember, this is a cycle that goes on and on and on. And there are people who are in their second cycle or their third cycle or their first cycle. It's not a first cycle for everybody. Somebody who lost something a regel ago is now in the second regel. So this guy gets up and he says, regel rishon. Now everybody should know that my find is now in the first regel. Okay, so keep that in mind, everybody. Regel sheni. If no one claimed it, then he comes up on regel sheni and he says regel sheni. I'm now announcing for the second time. It's like an auction, right? It's an ersten Mol, it's zweiten Mol, and dritten Mol. So he's announcing ersten Mol. Now regel sheni, he's announcing zweite Mol. Regel shlishi omer stam. When it comes to regel shlishi, he doesn't say regel shlishi, says the Gemara. He just says, I'm announcing it for the regel. In other words, the system should define that when he says regel, it's the third one. In other words, regel sheni, you have to say rishon. Regel rishon, you have to say rishon. Regel sheni, you have to say sheni. Regel shlishi, you don't say shlishi. That's what the Gemara is telling. In fact, the Gemara, va'amai, why? Lema regel shlishi. Then why don't you say regel shlishi, just like you said the regel rishon sheni? Answers the Gemara, the la'asala chlufa b'sheni. So it's a very odd answer that you don't say regel shlishi because maybe someone will confuse it with sheni. I don't know how you do that, but let's just say that if he says regel shlishi, someone may have misheard him and thought it was only regel sheni, and he won't be too anxious. It's like the Gemara, sheni nami Amid Beis, sheni nami isal achlufa b'rishon, top of Chavkas Amid Beis. If that's the case, then if he says sheni, maybe someone will mistake that for rishon and think it's only the first regel. So what are you telling me that that's an answer? And for the Gemara, haka also regel shlishi. No, you can't compare because Rashi says also l'chlufa b'sheni shema yesh shehu sober she'omer regel sheni by mistake. So it's not a comparison because to make a mistake between the first and the second is not so gefährlich because you still have another one after that. But to make a mistake between the second and the third, there you could strike out. So the Gemara wants to make a chilik and say that if everybody knows that when you announce if you announce it without an attached time frame like Rishon or Sheni, you automatically mean Shlishi, and no one can mistake that because there was no number mentioned. So apparently that's what the Gemara feels is the better way to go, is that you say regel Rishon, regel Sheni, and then regel Stam, and that Stam automatically means third. Okay, you can argue it makes sense, it doesn't make sense, but Rashi on the Chav Chesed Aleph, regel Rishon, Shuhu Machris Omer B'Hakrizo Zer regel Rishon. In other words, you don't want to be matriach the guy to have to run back home and come back to Eretz Yisrael 3 days later. So the whole point is that if he knows, oh, it really is mine, but I can wait till the next regel because no one is going to take it, then we don't panic him. We don't say, oh, you got to quickly run back to for the week. You don't have to do that. This way he comes b'kovadik in the next regel, and he knows it's his, and he goes to the lost and found, and he says, this is my simon, and he takes his item. He's going to assume no one's a ganef that's going to take it because he knows it's his. So he's not going to have any panic, and he'll come back. Shlishi omer stam, says Rashi, aveda matzasi. I found an Aveda, the Eina Omer Ezer Regel Hu. And he doesn't say, I'm in my first regel, my second regel, my third. He doesn't say anything. So that the person who lost it shouldn't say, oh, I have another regel to go. And he'll know this is my last shot. If it's really mine, I better hunker down and get it now, because otherwise I'm not going to collect this. So that's why the Gemara says we say stam, so there should be no confusion with a number. Okay, because someone may have misheard a number, but if there's no number, you can't mishear it. Okay, so that's the Gemara here, and that's what so that's the system. That's how you do it. You come in, there's an announcement, Regel Rishon, Regel Sheni, and then Regel Stam. Okay. So now we've resolved that. Says the Gemara, brings out a brisa. Tara Rabbanan. This brisa mirrors our Mishnah. Tara Rabbanan Barishona Kol Misha Motza Aveda He Machaz Aleh Shalosh Regalim La'achar Regel Achim Shivas Yamin. This is Rabbi Huda's interpretation. So this brisa is repeating Rabbi Huda's version of the Mishnah. Mishachara Beis Hamikdash b'meher v'yameinu, Shibana b'meher v'yameinu. This was when the Beis Hamikdash, there was oil rega. But when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and he right away says Shibana b'meher v'yameinu, Hiskinu Shia Machrizim b'batim Nesiyas b'batim Midrashis. So once we no longer had a Beis Hamikdash, what do? So that's basically what we've been working under all this time when we talk about where do you announce. So he says you go to the base, to the shul, to the Beis HaMedrash, and in other words, that's the meeting place. The shul is a meeting place. The shul is where people come. So the shul takes the place of the Beis HaMikdash or the Beis Medrash where they learn, and that's where you go to make your announcements. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. Mishurabu anusim hiskinu shiamodian l'shchena v'lemoadav v'diyah. Now, so this is very interesting. When the anusim are, it's hard to sort of translate that, but anus means by force. So mishurabu anusim, when the people who did things by force, we'll see what that means in a minute. When they became more prevalent, then it changed. You don't even have to go to shul. You tell your neighbor and your friend. In other words, chavra, you tell the people around you, and the word will get out that something was lost at the corner of Arcola and Percy, and you have to check your stuff. You lose it or not. So in other words, we went down from the Beis HaMikdash to the shul, and eventually in the circumstance where there were more problems in the street, we didn't even go to shul, you just announced it to the people around you. Frek the Gemara, Ma Sherabu Anasim. What is this strange language that Sherabu Anasim, when the people who did things by force were on the increase? What does that mean? Says the Gemara, the Amra Avidita Lamalka. I guess they're the collectors who say that everything belongs to the crown. In other words, anytime you find something that you don't know who it belongs to, it immediately goes Lamalka, to the crown.
The house always wins.
The house always wins, exactly. So if it goes to the Malka, then you better get your act together, because before you know it, it's going to be out of sight. Okay. So that's the Gemara. Let's take a look. All right, so there's no other Rashi. So again, he's giving us an example in practical terms. Again, today we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. So what do we do today? Actually, today the shul is the public square. So you have a lost and found, right? I mean, sometimes we hear an announcement in shul, someone lost a watch, someone lost this, because that's where people congregate. And if they can't, Baruch Hashem, they congregate in shul. If they come to shul, then that would be the logical place where you would ask around, did you find this? Did you find that? Okay. Now, Rav Ami Ashkach Odia de Dinri, Rav Ami found a sort of a basket of gold coins. Says Rashi, Klei Mole Zehuvin. He Klei Mole Zehuvin. He found a Klei, a basket, whatever, filled with gold coins. Chaziahu Barnash to call Mirsus. So a Barnash is a sort of a citizen. In other words, someone from the Medina who was around, probably a non-Jew he's referring to. And so Rav Ami got very anxious because he saw that this Barnash was eyeing him. So he got a little nervous. on Malay. So the Barnash said to Rav Ami, Zil Shakal and Nafshech, go take it yourself. This is very interesting. The Lav Parsa Anon. We are not Persians. The Omre Avidita Lamalka, who say everything belongs to the crown. So it's a very interesting exchange that Rav Ami found it. And he said, what am I going to do with it? Especially now that I see this fellow's eyeing me, what can I possibly do? So this Barnash says to him, don't you worry. I'm not telling on you. It's yours. Go take it. I'm not one of those guys who says everything belongs to the crown. So in other words, the Parsoi, the Persian, must have been the Anosim. They must have been what they described as those who took it by force. Anyway, it's an interesting little exchange, but it probably gives you a reflection of the times as to what people were doing with a Shabbos Aveda or whatever else. In other words, at one point in time, a Shabbos Aveda was either the finder or the crown, not you. In other words, it was not you, the finder, who had any fusim. It was either going to be the original owner or the crown. Okay? Now, here we get to the Gemara that I was referring to in terms of a location. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in another brisa. Even Toen Hoya Hoysa B'Yerushalayim. There was an Even Toen, meaning this is what I mean by a stone or a place where everybody used to come, and they would announce their tinus. In other words, they would say, "Here, I found something," etc., etc. Kol misha avdalo aveda naftal l'sham. Anybody who lost an aveda went there. Kol misha motza aveda naftal l'sham. So this was the place. Zeh omed machriz, zeh omed v'nosen simonim. This person would announce, and this person would give simonim, v'natla, and he would take it. V'zuhi shishaninu, and this is what we said in the Gemara, the Gemara in Tainus, su'uru im nimchas even atoin. So there's a famous Gemara in Tainus. It's about Choni Hamagel. Choni, the famous story of Choni Hamagel. He was a big tzaddik, and in the time when there was no rain, he challenged the Rabbi Shalom. He said, "I'm going to draw a circle here in the ground, and I'm going to stand in this circle, and I'm not going to leave this circle until the Rabbi Shalom gives rain." That's the Gemara there in Tainus. So, so eventually they gave rain. They gave so much rain that the people said to Chayni, you got to stop it. There's so much rain, we're drowning in water. So, and Chayni's response was that you don't ask the Rabbi Shalom to take away a bracha. The Rabbi Shalom gives you a bracha of rain. There's no such thing as too much rain. You can't tell the Rabbi Shalom, okay, enough of a bracha. I have enough bracha. So you don't do it. So this Gemara is what he brings down. Shu'uru in nimchas even hatoen. You know when I'm going to ask the Rabbi Shalom to stop the rain? When the even hatoen starts, when the rock, the even, that is that even hatoen, when the water starts eating into the rock and softening the rock and making the rock smaller, that's when I'm going to tell the Rabbi Shalom we have enough bracha. In other words, it's a euphemism for saying it's not happening. The rock doesn't get softened, the rock doesn't melt, and I'm not. And the Rabbi Shalom gives us bracha. We have to accept the bracha regardless whether or not it's too much rain or not rain. Anyway, so that's the point of it. But again, this is the Gemara that I was referring to. That we have. There was always a place where, and again, Jay, today it's the lost and found, but that was the lost and found, the Even Hatoyen, where everybody came to see whether or not they could find their stuff. So that was the place in Yerushalayim. Okay, let's take a look at Rashi. Su'uru and nimchas Even Hatoyen. Nichnas b'gishamim shegavu hagishamim lamala haimenu yesh gishamim yosem medai. There's more than enough. And he was asking Chayni to please pray to the Rabbi Shalom to withdraw the rain because it was too much. So he said, no, that we don't do. And again, that's what he means over here in this Gemara. Okay, so now we finished this sugya. Now we're going to go back in part to what we were talking about before. So we're starting another Mishnah, and we're going to ask the question that we asked before about whether or not avidita machriz or glima machriz. So let's
So,
take a look at
Rabbi,
this.
excuse me, it sounds like there's an opportunity for some retired people in Yerushalayim to start up the lost and found again.
Right?
Make one major lost and found probably in the old city where so many tourists come.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that could very well be the, I don't know what they have in Yerushalayim today, honestly, but if they have such a thing, but yeah, I mean, why not reinstitute it? There's so many people who come there to Yisrael. I mean, again, every community can have its own lost and found, of course, for people, but yeah, maybe when there's so many people coming there to Yisrael these days, then there should be a sort of a general lost and found for everybody. All right, says the Mishnah. Omer saveda v'lo omer simanea lo yitelai. If a person announces, I found an Aveda, and then the person comes and says, it's mine, but he doesn't give a siman. I mean, on its face, it's pretty obvious. Lo yitan lo, you don't give it to him. You don't give it to him. He didn't identify the object. Okay, that's a fairly simple statement. We're going to see what the Gemara says on this. V'horamai, and a person who has a reputation for being a ramai, a cheater, in other words, an unscrupulous individual, someone who has that reputation. Af al pisha omasimanea lo yitin lo. You hear this? If a person has a reputation for being an unsavory character and not trustworthy, then even if he brings a siman lo yitin lo, what does that mean? It means he must bring Adim. You can't deny him if it's his, but such a person has to actually bring Adim that it's his, and bringing a siman is not sufficient. Shenamar, and we have this previously, Adrosh Achicha also, until you investigate your brother. Chador Shasachicha im Ramahu mein Ramah. So the interpretation the Gemara gave was that you have to investigate the finder. I mean, you have to investigate the person, the claimant. You investigate the person who's saying it's mine, and you investigate whether he's a Ramai. If he is not a Ramai, then he can claim it with a siman. But if he has a reputation of being a Ramai, and we're going to see what such a reputation means, then we're going to say that even with simanim, he's cheating. In other words, we're even going to say that the fact that he's bringing simanim, he's doing it improperly, and we make him go all the way, and have to bring Adim to say, Adim have to say, yes, it belongs to this guy. And that's uncontroverted. If Adim say it belongs to him, it belongs to him. But we're not going to rely on Siman. Now we're going to get to the Gemara that we were discussing. Itmar, we learned, Rabbi Yehuda Omar Avidita Machriz, Rabbi Nachman Omar Glima Machriz. So this is that Gemara that was referred to in Daf Kaf Kasam and Aleph, that there's a machlokes between the Amoraim, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's sufficient to say Avidita, and Rabbi Nachman says, no, you have to say Glima. You actually have to say the object, but you leave open the simanim so that someone will just say, oh yes, I lost this shirt, I lost this diamond, I lost this object, and here's the sim. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Avidita Machriz. So Rabbi Yehuda says Avidita Machriz, the Amrit Kalima Machriz, Hashin and Laramai. In other words, what's Rabbi Yehuda's theory? Rabbi Yehuda's theory is, I'm going to announce something, but not enough for a Ramai, for a cheater, to jump in. Now, why is he afraid? So here's a scenario. The scenario is that he announces Glima. There's this very cunning guy who says, Glima, huh? All right, let me think about this a minute. I'm gonna take a chance and I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna say it was a red shirt. Right? In other words, a generic siman, not a specific siman, a generic siman. If we're going to allow simanim, the Gemara says we have to watch out for this Ramai that he may know a little bit, but not enough, and he'll take advantage, and he will say, let's say the color as an example, and then you're going to be forced to give it to him because he gave a siman. That's why Rabbi Yehuda says if you say avidita, there's no chance that a Ramai can get away with it because you're saying avidita. Avidita is generic. So he has to know what the item is. And we're not going to say he necessarily knows what the item is. He may know a siman about the item if the item is announced, but if the item is not announced, he knows nothing. So Rabbi Yehuda takes the position, we've got to be totally defensive, and we've got to be careful not to give a Ramai the slightest opening. That's why he says, we're afraid that the Ramai is going to jump in and take it. Okay, fine. Rav Nachman and Rav Nachman says that no, it's okay. I can say glima. Why? Because the Ramai lo chashinim. I'm not worried about a Ramai. The imkain in the davasof. So in other words, he's being very practical. He's saying, you know what? I can't worry about a Ramai in every case, because then I'm always going to be looking over my shoulder and saying, can I say this? Can I say that? There's a cheetah born every minute, right? Well, there's some expression. There's a gadaf born every minute. In other words, how far do I have to go to protect the integrity of this? I'm going to announce Lima, and the chips will fall where they may. That's Rav Nachman. Okay, so that's why each one gives his interpretation. Now, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, this is our Mishnah, Omar Veda, if he announces, I found an item, below, and doesn't say what it is, below Omar Simonel, and he doesn't say the Simonim, Arizeh lo Yitamo, you don't give it to him. That's the Mishnah. Now, the Gemara is now going to sound out the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman. If you hold like Rabbi Yehuda that avidita machris or kamash malan, the Mishnah teaches us afagav the omer glima the omer simanim l'mahadrelei. Makes sense, because even though if you announce avidita machris, then even if he says glima, oh, it was a shirt, but he didn't say anything more than that. Lo mahadrelei. In other words, I announce I found an object, and you come along and say, yeah, I lost a shirt. I lost a shirt. And it turns out it is a shirt. It turns out it is a shirt. But he didn't say anything more than that. In other words, his answer was it was a galima, but without a siman, lo yitin lo. So Rabbi Yehuda is completely comfortable that if you say avidita, and someone tells you what the avidita is, but doesn't give details, that he doesn't get it. And that's what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, what does the Mishnah say? Omas haveda, below omas simanel, the guy didn't say the siman, lo yitalo. Even if he said it was a glima and it was a glima, he didn't give a siman. So that makes sense. But if you hold like Rav Nachman, that glima is makres, that you have to say glima, glima, glima. Then each guy says it was a glima. In other words, there's two people who come, there's the true owner, and then there's the Rama. So they both come and say, oh, glima, it was a glima. So therefore, you have to say, kilo oma simanim, o mahadrele. If he doesn't say simanim, then you don't return it to him. So in other words, there's a kasha here. According to Rav Nachman, who says that you say glima machres, then how does this all fit together? Because if you say avidita machres, then it makes sense. If he doesn't say the simanim, even if he says glima, you don't give it to him. But if you say glima machres, that you announce glima, and each one says glima, then what are you going to do? Then tzricha l'meimer ki lo oma simanim lo mahadrele. then in other words, who are you returning it to? There's nowhere to return it to because they're both arguing and saying that it was glima. So what he's trying to say is that according to Rav Nachman, this Mishnah does not fit 100% because even if he says the simanim, which is glima, then you have to say simanim, and all he said was glima. So that's the kasha on Rav Nachman from our Mishnah. How do you reconcile? Amar Rav Safra, comes Rav Safra and says, La'olam glima machriz. Really, glima is machriz. In other words, you announce the item. Oma iya glima v'oma iyu simanim. Oma iya glima v'oma iyu simanim. He says glima and he says simanim. Umay lo omar es simanea. So what does the Mishnah mean when it says he didn't say simanim? And for the Gemara, lo omar simanim if hakim dida. So in other words, Vasafra wants to reconcile that you can even hold our Mishnah according to Rav Nachman, who says glima machriz. We have a kasha. Then what do we do with each one is going to say glima? How are we going to reconcile? The answer is that when he says simanim, he doesn't mean regular simanim. In other words, you can come back and say, oh, it was a red shirt. Well, a red shirt is a siman. But is it really a siman? It's a generic siman, but it's not a specific siman. So he says, lo oma simanim of hakim dida. You have to go more in depth and you have to say, oh yes, it had a buttonhole that had a slit on it. In other words, it's not just a red shirt. It's a red shirt with a buttonhole that had a cut next to it. So now who would know that? The guy whose shirt it is, because not everybody's going to know that there was a cut next to the buttonhole. So that's what he means by simanim. He doesn't mean regular simanim. He means muvhakin, special simanim that only the real owner would know. So that's how, in other words, he wants to reconcile that the Mishnah can actually go according to either Manda Omar, whether you say Vidita or Glima. And if you're going to say Glima, then you're going to have to get into this a little bit more specific. Let's take a look at Rashi. Chashin l'ramai, Shema ha'oved is onen ben shchenav, Talisa nevda. Oh, so the Ramai heard his neighbors saying, oh, I lost my shirt. I lost the shirt. And this person will know that it was a red shirt, because he'll hear the guy said, oh, I lost my red shirt. He'll go ahead and give simanim. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, we say avidita, in other words, for the thief, for the cheater, the less said, the better. That's what the Rashi is telling us. If you say avidita, less likelihood that he'll know anything. If you say glima, then he'll perk up his ears and hear two people talking. Oh, I lost my shirt, blah blah blah. And again, it could be a diamond. So we're talking about something much more expensive. So therefore, that's why he said you don't announce it. En l'dava sof, the hashda nami masikadate v'ome im talasi shemotzes elisimanel. So the never end. I omra bishloima avidita machriz lo maske shema chayfetz. It's draftana lashmina the afagav the oma high talos avadati tzarech litin simanim, because he said just avidita, right? So therefore he's saying it makes sense. If you're going to say it's avidita, then it makes sense. Okay. Okay. Amalei in to sovereign. Amalo you doing yoditun. But the lav ramahu shekain shekach hoyelo lisholim. In other words, but if he says glima, then in other words, he'll know what it is because he's actually claiming it. So it's not going to be someone who is going to be accidentally falling into it. Okay, so Rashi's telling us something interesting here, that, let's take a look at the Gemara here for a minute. Um, okay. In other words, when a person comes, there's something called magid v'chayzer magid. A witness can't testify and then come back and retestify. That's not allowed. If he testifies, that's his testimony. He can't back up. He can't back out of his testimony later because we're afraid maybe he has an ulterior motive. So the Gemara here wants to tell us. Let's take a look exactly what he's referring to. So the Gemara here wants to tell us that when a person comes to testify and say what it is, so if he was, in other words, he says what it is, and that's what we have to accept. That's what we have to accept. Okay, actually, I think this Rashi goes to later Gemara, so let's hold off. In other words, the machlokes here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nachman has to do with whether or not we are afraid that a Ramai is going to take advantage of the situation and therefore improperly take the item. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not a problem because it's avidita. According to Rabbi Nachman, who says Galima, it could be a problem. It could be a problem, but if we're going to require him to be very specific in his simanim, meaning he can't just say a generic statement. Yes, it's a colored shirt. It's got to be mine, but he's got to be medactic on what it is. Then, if he doesn't say simanim of hakim, we don't give it to him. So that's how Rav Safra wants to answer that the Gemara can come out again, even according to Rav Nachman, because we're not going to be worried that a cheater will take advantage because he too has to be very specific. So that's what we're holding now, and we'll finish next week, Mr. Shem, but that last piece of Gemara has to do with the Ramai himself. In other words, how we deal with the Ramai. What's that?
One thing, I looked it up. Yerushalayim has a lost and found, and it's at the central bus station.
There you go. Okay, so that's now the definitive place where you can go and get that's the Evan Towen. That's the Evan Towen of modern day Israel.
Yeah.
Is the central bus station. Excellent. Thank you for that. So now we know that all is not lost. Some can be found. That's okay. All right. So it's a little bit of an interesting Gemara here of this discussion. Which we'll finalize it next week and go into the next Mishnah. But again, you see how medactic the Gemara is in going through all of this, is that we want to cover all bases and make sure that since there is such a mitzvah of a Shabbos Aveda, that it be done correctly. So there's a time element to it, and you have to fulfill the time element. There's also a way of expressing it that has to be done too. It isn't just generic. You have to, in other words, even though there's a machlokes between these two Manda Amrim, but still each one has a shita as to why you say it a certain way and what you say. So again, the Gemara is giving us a keen insight into how people fulfill that mitzvah. Today, the mitzvah of Shabbos Aveda, it's a different mitzvah because today we don't have oila regel. So you got to figure if something is lost, then it's probably local, or if it is in Eretz Yisrael, then anybody who see, I wouldn't have known that it was at the central bus station, but maybe I would ask around and someone would say, oh, people bring things there. Yeah, they're honest. They bring things to the central bus station. You can ask out, and maybe you'll be able to find it. So it may be a needle in a haystack, but nevertheless, there will at least be that possibility that even in modern day Israel, we can kind of mitzvah Shabbos Aveda with the lost and found.
Well, they can always stop any bus and give it to the bus driver and ask them to return it.
That's correct.
So that's a system that covers the whole city. To anything found can't find its way back to the central bus station.
Right, and it's very interesting that you make that point because, you'd normally think, bus driver, how can I rely on a bus driver? But you have Ehrlicher bus drivers who know that if someone lost something, it's incumbent on them to try to get it to the lost and found so that there's a possibility to retrieve it. That's the beauty of Eretz Yisrael, is that you can live these mitzvahs in real time. You can
Right.
live these mitzvahs in real time. All right, so Mitzvah, we'll just finalize the Gemara next week, and then we'll go into the next Mishnah. But again, it's really food for thought how careful our Chazal were to establish a mitzvah and make sure that there was a possibility of fulfilling the mitzvah in its best light. So that's a very positive thing. All right.
Rabbi, thank you.
Have a great week, everybody. We'll pick up next week.